Hitha, do you have a memory of what sparked your love of science or medicine?
I do. I have a few that I think all intermingled together into why I decided to work in science and specifically life sciences when I grew up. So my father had a really unique way of delivering consequences for unexpected behavior, I think is the correct term in this day and age.
Is that gentle parenting or?
I think it's nerdy parenting when I tell you what it is. Whenever I was out of line and needed to be kind of brought back straight, he would hand me the medical dictionary from his office. He would pick 5 words and he would give me an hour to write an essay. Including,
a whole essay?
Yeah, that explained either a certain kind of cancer and yes.
Do you do this with your kids?
I'm going to. I started that when I was about 10 years old, and so Ro is 8, so I hope he's ready because it's coming.
It's kind of brilliant.
It is. And then I was reading, I don't know if you remember these or read these, but Lurlyn McDaniel, she wrote these young or middle grade books about kids with terminal disease, like cancer, brain tumors, heart transplants, whatnot, but were YA romance. At the same time, when I was reading these and got super into it, my dad's best friend, who's my godfather, his leukemia returned and he ended up passing away. And I saw that deterioration from someone who has been this giant bear of a man and my hero to deteriorating in a hospital bed. And I remember then thinking, you work on cancer drugs with my dad, and yet we still couldn't figure out how to cure you. There's no reason why someone like you should pass away. So that kind of importance of the work that life sciences and scientists like my father did very much inspired what I think was what my career was going to be. I was going to figure out some way to work in this field. Now enter college. I was terrible in my science classes.
Really?
I was a disaster in the lab. I just didn't have that level of attention and detail you need to be working in a lab or to be a physician. And I learned that I'm not meant to be in the lab. But in college, I also studied history. I had a lot of business internships. And what I discovered is I love storytelling. Mm-hmm. I loved sales and marketing. And I said, maybe there's an opportunity for me to work in the business side of industry. So I ended up in tech sales actually right out of college, but after training, I got put on the global pharma team, which was fantastic. Gave me exposure to the industry in a unique way. But after a couple years, I was like, I don't want to be a vendor anymore, and I want to actually be in industry. Mm-hmm. And that was the time my father's company started to grow and scale, and they began hiring. So that childhood dream of wanting to work with my dad on helping develop life-saving medications finally came true, and that was in 2009, and 14 years later.
What's considered biopharmaceuticals?
Biopharmaceuticals is basically now this overarching term for therapies, medications, and devices that fall within the biotech pharmaceutical sphere.
So you've said for most of your career, you've often been the youngest, the only woman, or one of the few people of color in a room. How does that perspective shape you when it comes to your view of medicine?
It shapes me a lot because I think about who are we formulating this for and who are we developing this for, and in the context of my own experience as a patient in the healthcare system. So I am the first to say, when we're designing a clinical study, are we making sure women are part of the enrollment criteria? Not only that, are we making sure we actually enroll 50% women? Are we making sure we enroll plenty of people of color? When I was studying a lot of clinical trial databases just to see who trials were done on in the past for the products that we were then developing, I saw that it was mostly men and largely white men, not often enough people of color enrolled. And when you are testing the clinical efficacy of a product that's going to ostensibly go into a wide diversity of people on a very specific type of person whose size, whose physiology, and whose gender could affect how the drug responds in body. Mm-hmm. I don't think you're actually doing your due diligence as a drug developer to make sure this is a drug for everybody.
How is this not something that's mandated?
It was So this is a fun story. Back in the 70s, 80s, which was like the heyday of like when billion-dollar drugs were getting developed and launched left and right, clinical investigators said, we don't know how to account for menstruation. Like menstruation seems like a big variable to try to deal with as a part of the clinical development program, so we're not going to enroll women. It was a part of, in 1993, when the NIH's budget was finally reauthorized, that one major provision in there is that all NIH studies had to enroll women and people of color kind of in line with the same population of the United States. But it took until 1993, and that was only still for NIH-funded studies. It took industry about another 10 years to catch up and get to a point where they were enrolling women, enrolling people of color to clinical studies.
So tell me about how skeptical or not skeptical people should be, because I think back to COVID, it's like a very prominent example. People were so skeptical of the vaccine. But then like the joke online now is like, oh, people were doing their own research on the vaccine, and yet like Ozempic, a diet drug, is like, yeah, just shoot it in my arm or wherever you shoot it. Do people have reason to be skeptical?
At this day and age, I will say, as someone who spends a lot of time on clinicaltrials.gov reading about who's been enrolled in studies and reading study reports, if you take a look at how the studies, what the makeup of the studies were now, it is very diverse, and it does properly reflect. We've come a long way, and I have to say, for as alarming as some of these moments are, in this case, the industry did course correct rather quickly in a time where they don't typically course correct as fast. And I will say with the COVID vaccine, it was one of the rare examples when the industry really worked together. There was incredible cross-sector collaboration to be able to get these vaccines out as quickly as they were, to get them updated as quickly as they were. I think we're in a much stronger place now that should another pandemic happen, we have this kind of, not just the technology, but the collaboration to be able to produce something quickly. And yeah, I read a lot of the research, I read a lot of the reporting, and I think this was a rare time where I was so impressed and amazed at how selfless the industry was, because we're not a very selfless industry. I'll be the first to admit it.
So I'm looking at your sweatshirt now, and when we originally spoke, you told me that you were going to undergo a hysterectomy. And you had a perspective on it that I hadn't heard before. You were pissed.
Yeah.
Why were you pissed?
I'm 38 years old. I'll be 39 in 2 weeks. I kind of like came up right when the HPV vaccine was approved, but I grew up in a very conservative household. Like my mom took me to my first gynecological appointments, and there was this messaging from the doctors I had seen. It's like, well, if you're having sex, you should get the HPV vaccine. Couldn't tell my mom that V card was long gone. And so it felt like it would have been admitting something that I wasn't ready to tell her. And I couldn't just see the doctor on my own. I should have gone to Planned Parenthood, got the vaccine when I could. But I think because I was scared of that kind of cultural, social terms.
So common.
Yeah, that I never got it. So in the past, I've been monitoring with my OBGYN, my annual PAPs. I've also had to get colposcopies and ongoing monitoring and bleeps, that to monitor the presence of HPV-16 that has in my body caused cervical dysplasia. So really high-grade lesions in my lower and upper cervix now. It was after my PAP earlier this year and then the following copal that my OB said, I think you're gonna need a hysterectomy. I'm gonna put you in touch with this specialist. And luckily, he is the best surgeon for this in New York City. All my OB friends have said if I had to have this, he's who I would go to. So I'm grateful for access to great doctors and supportive doctors and care. I'm glad that it can be done laparoscopically, which is much more minimally invasive. I can go home the same day. Within 6 weeks, things will be fine. But how did we get here where it was either you got the HPV vaccine to help reduce the risk of gynecological cancers in this way, and lesions may not have been this severe, or a hysterectomy, and there's nothing in between.
And why is there nothing in between?
Women have never been treated as a priority in our healthcare system. I mean, just like we talked about before, drugs, even that were originally now used as first-line therapy for breast cancer and ovarian cancer, was usually tested in a cancer that predominantly male patients were enrolled in first before we got around to seeing if it worked on women. Chemotherapy drugs,
Yes.
if we just take a look at this example, most of the first line chemotherapy drugs that you get when you're diagnosed with a solid tumor cancer have been tested on men first
Wow.
and in other cancers first before they got around to doing breast cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine, cervical cancer studies. So we decided what the first line therapies would be based on men
Got it.
and what men have. And then we kind of said, does this happen to work for women? We've never really taken a women first approach in drug development, in therapeutic development. We're starting to. I think the identification of the BRCA gene to help identify the risk of breast cancer for women and create these sort of pre-Viver modes of, undergoing double mastectomies and whatnot before the cancer actually has a chance to develop is one approach. And in a way, this is also the same thing. But why are we having to have whole organs removed? Because we haven't developed therapies, and women are just not viewed as important enough, or reimbursement isn't important enough. There's a lot of different reasons why, but consider who runs healthcare and the biopharma industry.
Is it just like who's funding these studies, basically?
But it goes to how much money can you make? What is the total addressable market? And we still haven't considered that women make up over 50% of the population in the United States.
Yeah.
So
there is a hierarchy of care.
There is a hierarchy of, I would say, where you're investing your research dollars. And it's usually in what has traditionally always made money versus where the unmet need and the need really is.
Is there a better model from another country that you've seen?
No.
That's the problem, right?
This is a global issue.
So I'm like shocked to hear that. I thought you were going to be like, yeah, in Sweden.
Think about it. The United States is still where the most cutting edge research in healthcare in the biopharma industry is still happening.
Yeah.
It's not happening anywhere else. But at the same time, the men running this industries are the ones deciding where to allocate research dollars. The ones running the big healthcare funds are the ones deciding who to invest in. And women's health, while being important for every part of our life, you can't have life without women birthing more people into this world. Women's healthcare rights are basically been revoked in many states in this country due to abortion bans and nailing down on reproductive healthcare access. It's scary.
That white men became the gold standard of drug studies.
I would say white men were the ones. Think about who was running the pharma companies for many, many, many years. White men. So it didn't occur to them that maybe we should be testing this on different people. They thought what worked on them would work on everybody.
Got it.
And what we're now seeing is that there are health differences between different ethnic groups and between men and women. So if you're just calculating dose of a drug based on a 6-foot man's physiology, and a white man with his particular conditions that he's genetically predisposed to and lifestyle-wise is predisposed to, you're missing out on the fact that women typically carry more fat and less water in their body. Therefore, drugs are going to interact differently inside women. South Asian people, for example, tend to have higher cholesterol and at greater risk for cardiac disease, but we are more predisposed to diabetes, heart disease, et cetera, and we tend to carry more fat in our midsection. And those affect how a drug will absorb in your body and how much will enter the bloodstream.
Wow.
So the quote unquote gold standard of things, white men being the predominant enrollee in these clinical studies in so many of the drugs that we take without thinking, yes, it has changed. That's one of the things that has remarkably changed. And I am delighted that we are putting a more diverse lens and approach in clinical trial enrollment. We also need to do better.
So we've heard of the pink tax. I did an episode where we learned that shampoo is more expensive for women, razors, tampons, obviously. Is healthcare more expensive for women?
Yes.
That was a quick yes.
Think about it this way. Women are still paying out of pocket for birth control, even though the Affordable Care Act had meant to say everyone should have free access to contraceptive care, regardless of your gender. And insurers were at one point required to cover all birth control, no exceptions. Now, when something that happened and a weakening of the Affordable Care Act was that religious-led employers could decline or opt out of that due to quote unquote religious beliefs. 30% of hospitals in the United States are run by the Catholic Church or Catholic charities.
Wow.
So 30% of hospitals will not necessarily, or there's extra red tape in order to get your birth control covered, or you choose to pay for it out of pocket. Meanwhile, Viagra is covered by every insurer. That thing is cheap.
It's covered?
Covered completely.
That's wild.
So that's one very clear example in the discrepancy of, like, men are supposed to, you would think that the argument of, well, you should do what the Lord has blessed you with. So if the Lord has blessed you with the inability to get it up, you should live with that.
Oh my God. Or you should pay out of pocket for it.
Exactly.
I don't think you should live with it, but you should pay out of pocket the way women have to pay. Yeah.
Whereas contraceptive care, like birth control, is prescribed for a million different reasons outside of preventing pregnancy.
Yeah.
It is the first standard of treatment for fibroids, PCOS, and other endometriosis, and a lot of other gynecological conditions that have nothing to do with preventing pregnancy that directly impact a woman's quality of life. If she's in pain, she can't go to work.
Yeah.
If she is in pain, she can't go to school. If she is in pain, she can't live. People with uteruses should not have to pay out of pocket for necessary care that allows them to live.
Totally. So you mentioned heart disease, but I was reading that it's the leading cause of death for both genders in the US, which I did not know. And women are more likely to die after they have a heart attack. Can you explain why that is?
When you think of a heart attack, what are the symptoms you think of?
Tight chest. I also think of a man, to be honest. Like I think of Big and Sex and the City. It's like such a thing in movies for men to suffer from.
To keeling over, the immediate chest pain, etc.
Yes.
For a woman, a heart attack could manifest with nausea. Really? It could manifest with shortness of breath, panicked feelings, anxiety.
So just a regular Thursday.
Basically. So unless you know, you go to the emergency department, ask for a high sensitivity troponin test and an EKG, and for aspirin, you advocate for yourself to get the suspected heart attack protocol, you will likely be just sent home saying, oh, you have food poisoning. Oh, you're stressed. Wow. And women are more likely to be discharged from an emergency department mid-heart attack than men.
And that's why they have a higher death rate.
And this is actually very close to me because our caregiver, who's been with our family for 8 years now, her daughter texts me on a Sunday night saying, so my mother won't be coming in. She was complaining of not feeling well. She went to the emergency department and it turns out she had a stent put in.
Wow.
And when I talked to her, I go, how did you know to go to the hospital and how did you know to actually advocate for this? She said, I've been hearing you talk about the different symptoms of women's heart attacks for 6 years now, and so I knew what to ask for.
The New York Times cites a study that says doctors and nurses prescribe less pain medication to women than men after surgery, even though women report more frequent and severe pain levels. So it's not just about who's being studied, it's actually, there's inequality in care as well. Mm-hmm. What do you know about the bias that exists among doctors, and is it at all acknowledged?
I am very lucky to have a lot of friends who are physicians at the beginning of their career and starting to take on senior leadership positions where they are shifting just because what was standard of care when we were learning and what we were taught when we were interns and in medical school, these things can change too, and they listen to their nurses. I think so many times a nurse will say, hey, I need to get some pain meds for this patient. A doctor who's seeing or rounding on 20 patients at a time may not just be like automatically. That bias is a part of the curriculum. It's a part of how medicine has been delivered in this country and worldwide for years. And I also have to point out that also Black women suffered the most in this. Serena Williams just had a pulmonary embolism in the past after she had delivered her daughter, and she felt off and she knew what it could have been. She immediately had to advocate for herself to get a CT and get a heparin drip stat because she felt a clot in her body. And even then, it took 2, 3, 4 attempts before she actually got those tests and those medicines. So I can't explain how we got here because we've been developing how we deliver medicine from the male lens and by men for so long. We haven't ever thought about a patient-first approach to medicine. To that too, I will say for anyone who's in a hospital watching this or finds himself in after watching this, don't be afraid to advocate for yourself. Even if you have to say, I need a jab of Motrin, I need the injectable Tylenol, I need pain medication right now. And complain until the doctor comes into the room. And when they say, what's your scale on a pain of 1 to 10? Say, it's 10 as if I was a man.
Because we're used to having pain, so we downplay it.
We do, but also we don't want to inconvenience. How many times are we like, oh, I don't want to bother the doctor. Oh, I don't want to bother the nurse. I'm okay, I can handle it.
Yeah.
I mean, we have an organ that sheds once a month. Like, we know how to live with pain in a way.
Women and families are also asked to take on extreme costs when it comes to infertility. This is something, I'm 32, so a lot of my friends are starting to get to this point. They didn't realize, how frequent infertility is and also how expensive it is. And it's considered a women's health issue.
It's an economic issue, and it's a workforce issue, and it's a productivity issue. Because if you aren't able to sustain your population growth, how can a country go on, especially now when one party wants to restrict immigration at severe rates? How are you going to sustain, if not grow, your population to work and contribute to the GDP, to keep cities and towns and the country running? In order to have a country, you need people. How do you have people? It's now increasingly with the help of fertility services. This is not a women's issue. This is a global population and a global development issue. And unfortunately, to your point, to the point of where is the cost of fertility treatments, like how is it structured? It's not in the actual retrieval or the physician and nurse costs of the process. It's the drugs. Because these drugs, even if they are insured, covered by insurance, it's usually very partial coverage or selective coverage of a couple of the drugs. People are still paying out of pocket thousands of dollars for these drugs that, again, are old hormones. There is nothing new or novel about fertility drugs. There is a single manufacturer on the market right now who can charge what they want, so they do.
So fertility drugs and hormones are the same as everything. We mark it up to any price they want.
Yeah, right now you only have one manufacturer on the market. And they own the market. And therefore, by being the only one, they could price this however they want. It is very Martin Shkreli, but if you don't aggressively price things like in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, it doesn't necessarily get the same attention. Like it's not so egregious, or people are like, well, it's just expensive, except when you stop and say, why is it expensive? And I've talked to fertility doctor friends of mine, and listen, I've looked into this. It requires a different kind of manufacturing suite that my manufacturing partners don't have right now. It requires a way to build a new distribution channel to be able to make this as cheap as possible. Because when you consider why a drug can be so expensive in America, we have many layers to our distribution that goes from manufacturer to patient than other countries do. They have a much more flat system. So it goes from manufacturer to distributor to then, depending on if it's kind of a retail pharmacy dispensary, a pharmacy benefit manager working with your insurer to figure out what price they're going to pay to then take it to that pharmacy. And even different pharmacies are going to have different prices to then go to the patient.
Got it. So there's a lot behind the scenes that we have to consider, is what you're saying.
There is, and I think it's an excuse to maintain a status quo in a very bloated system because it's a profitable system. Everyone is making more money than I would say that they need to when you consider people not being able to eat or afford insulin on a regular basis, because these companies are extremely profitable where profits are growing. And I see executive pay and shareholder return being the people who get the most of that and less going to the employees who went into this wanting to help people.
Tell me if I'm wrong. It seems to me like the only way to make something like this not a women's issue is for the government to get involved. Like it has to be subsidized in some way, or it has to be mandated that egg freezing is covered by certain employers, or if not subsidized by the government.
I would say I wish the government would take a more active role in, I wouldn't even say dictating drug prices. I think there's a workaround, which become, just like you did with the COVID vaccine, become the biggest purchaser of some drugs that people are having a hard time affording and having access to, and then work with local pharmacies, like you did with the COVID vaccine, on the distribution of those drugs. And when you are the biggest procurer, you can negotiate on price in a way that circumvents the whole issue of biopharma not wanting the government to say what they should price it as.
Right.
Take that economic carrot and use it as a stick instead.
The term gaslighting or medical gaslighting is real. I was reading, trying to figure out if I had experienced it. How do you spot it?
It's so subtle.
That's what's confusing.
It's not the egregious, you're in insane pain after having delivered a baby and you're being ignored and you don't feel well. That is medical, I would say, negligence and outright terrible care. Gaslighting is so subtle and it's so insidious because it's in a way where you're kind of said, I've seen this before, you'll be fine with this. When someone is too quick to say, this is all you need, and they want to just move on to the next patient versus, taking the time and making sure you've answered all your questions, explaining things multiple times if you're struggling to understand. I'm so lucky to have, I think, just the world's best OBGYN. She has never rushed me. When she called me to tell me about needing a hysterectomy, she stayed on the phone with me for 45 minutes.
Wow.
Talking me through different options, saying, I don't think conization is going to be the right thing for you given we've seen now these lesions get increasingly severe. She goes, are you sure you're done having kids? I can refer you to a fertility clinic and you could do a round of IVF and just freeze some embryos if you're not sure. And she just was so supportive. And she was listening to me as a person and not just thinking about my uterus and my reproductive system as a patient.
How are you feeling about it now? It must be kind of scary to feel like there's some things being taken out of you.
It is.
Yeah.
And then, I had my period again, like for the second time in 2 weeks, and I'm like, I can't wait. Goodbye. Excited for you to be evicted. It's both and.
Yeah.
And I'm someone who's had really severe postpartum and prenatal depression in both of my pregnancies. So something I requested very early on was a referral to a reproductive psychiatrist. And I have friends who made excellent recommendations, and I've been talking to one and got on an anti-anxiety med because I know how this region of my body has affected my mental health. They are intertwined, and while we haven't identified those specific mechanisms of action of how various hormonal release and imbalances can affect our neurochemical balance, I mean, I have a feeling it's there, and I would like to be able to invest time and resources in identifying that women's reproductive system brain connection. We just haven't really understood it. But again, I'm lucky to have a supportive OB who immediately wrote that referral, gave me a list of psychiatrists that she's referred patients to in the past, and then checks in on me.
That's important. Are there higher authorities to escalate a problem if it persists?
I think second and third opinions are kind of the first line of escalation.
Yeah.
Because if you're being told now by 3 different people, maybe they're onto something. I would also say, it makes me annoyed that we have to do this. Sometimes finding a doctor who visibly resembles who you are is really important. I have friends who are Black women who only go to Black women physicians and dentists and optometrists and healthcare providers. And even though that might adds a significant more work for them to find these physicians, and if it's not in their neighborhood to get to them, for them it's a priority because they go, I know when I come in and I have questions, my pain, my symptoms, my concerns will be taken seriously. Think about who your doctors are, and within what's covered, do what you can to find ones that you do feel comfortable with. The second thing is I work in biopharma, and I think Eastern medicine has had a lot of these things figured out before we ever did. So places like Parsley Health that does employ a East-West approach and a holistic view of healthcare might be the right kind of primary care facility for you to be able to know that you're going to be taken care of, but also you're going to take both approaches in resolving what malady is. And I think the last thing is remembering in this country, we don't have an actual healthcare system. We have a disease management system that is very profitable. And the role of a doctor is to diagnose and treat. They are looking for problems because they'll know how to treat it, and it's very clear cut. So if you do need something more holistic, go to practices that employ that approach, or go see an acupuncturist or a Chinese medicine doctor or an Ayurvedic practitioner and understand and get to know your body in a different level, using a different approach. But ultimately, I think it all kind of falls into wanting to take better care of yourself. And I'll say the last thing is try to take care of yourself. The basics sound so boring. Eat well, move your body, get sleep, manage your stress. But ultimately, that is what wellness and health is going to contribute to.
Okay, we've talked a lot today about what's wrong. Overall, what do you think we're doing right? What gives you hope?
What gives me hope in healthcare for women, especially in America these days, is actually whenever I open Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah.
I guess I had just gotten on Doctor Talk and Women's Physician Talk.
Yeah.
But the way I have seen so many incredible physicians educating about their respective areas, from plastic surgery and more cosmetic elements to cardiac care, to how they're actually delivering care for patients. Dermatology TikTok is very fascinating. It's fun to watch because the people work outside the system. These women are largely saying, I get what I have to do as part of my job, but here's how I want to do things differently. And social media has been an incredible vehicle for, I think, teaching women about their bodies and how to also advocate for themselves in the system that already exists. And I think in time we will see change. We're starting to. But it's going to take a lot more of us to work in this industry, get to the senior levels within this industry, or build the companies that we're not being served by. And I think you're seeing a lot more women. Digital health, I think, is a great opportunity for women's healthcare to be prioritized in the women's health system, to be built from the ground up. If being able to have one-on-one time with the doctor is hard, telemedicine can be extremely useful. I've never met my psychiatrist, just Zoomed with her.
Okay, I want to do a little rapid fire about you.
Yes.
So you wrote a book about Kamala Harris. It's called We're Speaking, The Life Lessons of Kamala Harris, How to Use Your Voice, Be Assertive, and Own Your Story. What is the lesson or advice from the book that changed the way that you move throughout the world?
It's a words of wisdom from her mother, which is don't let anyone tell you who you are. You tell them who you are. And I think women mostly have been put into boxes that are convenient for men to understand their roles in society. I am not just a mom. I am not just a wife. I'm not just someone who works in healthcare, and I am not just a content creator. I reject shrinking myself to fit your comfort, and I'm all about the hyphens. And if that makes you uncomfortable, well, there's the door.
Yep. I want to snap for that. Your website says Hitha on the go, and you are really on the go. I see you on Instagram for everybody who they need to follow you. Your goal is to bring the same sensibility to all decisions, small and big, that women make every day. You walked in here and I thought, wow, you look so glowy. And immediately you shared what it was. You said, what did you share? I won't share it.
Mix serum with your foundation or tinted moisturizer, and you get it into like a nice, beautiful jelly consistency and apply it. And then I also like to apply it, like I'll smear it all over my face and then I'll blend it out with a very fluffy brush, like a powder brush. And that to me is just, I saw this on Instagram. My friend Aditya actually was the one who did this reel. I am like, this is genius.
It really works.
It works so well. And the second thing is if you're using like almost stay on like a stick concealer, dab like a concealer brush and like a tiny bit of face oil, and then use that to blend it out so you don't get the creases and like a cakey look. It looks really natural.
So I love that you're such a sharer. One of the things that you talk about a lot is that you deeply love a well-packed suitcase. I used to be good at this. Something happened and I lost it. What is the key to a well-packed suitcase?
Step one is pack from the items that you always reach for when you're at home. Like 80% of your suitcase should be power pieces, like the jeans that you reach for when you're on your period and you're bloated, the shirt that always makes you feel like $1 million, even your makeup bag. It's like, what is my daily makeup routine? Do that and then throw in a fun lipstick. And then you have room, about 20%, to do, I'm going to Paris, I need to have that striped shirt.
Yes, and heels that I never wear.
Yeah, don't wear heels in Paris. You're never gonna end up wearing them.
But I pack heels everywhere I go and I never wear them. I only wear sneakers. This is a great rule.
So do like a fun sneaker, like a great pair of like Air Force Ones that have a great pattern or color as like your evening sneaker, and then do a daytime sneaker that is like your workhorse, cobblestones, subway grates, all of that for daytime. And then like a cute pair of flats that are maybe embellished and fancy.
Were you always a sharer?
Yes.
Like as a teenager, your friends were calling you like, what eyeliner do we wear?
Oh, I didn't know how to do makeup when I was a teenager.
It happened
I was
later.
asking them. This is very new.
TikTok really was great.
Bless TikTok and YouTube and Instagram.
I always think TikTok is a very female-first platform. It's cool.
I'd agree with that.
You're a multi-hyphenate, so you also have an amazing newsletter, Smart Solutions for Your Best Life. Your site says, it gives you a few bullet points about like what it is. This one stood out to me. It says, give graciously.
Yes.
What do you give graciously most often?
Besides advice,
Yeah.
I had to actually, when you sent this question over, I had to ask like my girlfriends because I'm like, I don't know what I give graciously the most. And they said your time. And they said you never rush people, you really listen, and you're always careful to ask, do you need to vent or do you want advice? And you can change your mind in between, but I just want to mentally prepare myself for how I can best help you. And I think that was like the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. But two, I think we all just want to be heard.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we want to feel heard and we want to feel valued. And so by being a good listener and helping where I can, and even if that's just door dashing some Taco Bell, like grab a seat on the couch, here's a blanket, let's talk.
What's the last thing someone gave to you graciously?
There's a few things. There has been 3 pieces of advice that I've heard from 3 different friends that I think have really been sticking with me, that I keep mentally coming back to when I find myself being overwhelmed. So one is a mantra that my friend Neeti often shares in her yoga classes, which is breathe here and be here. And it's a moment of reminder of just when things seem to be getting so overwhelming, reground yourself by just saying, breathe here and be here. She also recorded like a beautiful morning yoga flow to me. Like this was a couple years ago that I still practice and start almost every single day with. And that to me is one of the greatest gifts I've ever been given. And she's said she's going to do a new meditation for me for the surgery recovery time, which I'm very grateful for.
That's beautiful.
The second piece of advice is know what season you're in. Are you planting seeds? Are you tending and growing a garden? Or are you harvesting? That's something my friend Neha has said. And she went on a career pause to prioritize family life when her son was born. And out of that pause came the platform she's building called Mother Entitled, which is redefining what it means to be a stay-at-home parent in a more empowered, modern, powerful way, which it really is. Needed. It's very needed. And she talks a lot about how those early years of her parenting journey, she was planting the seeds for now this cultivation and harvesting time she's in now. So as someone's preparing for her own pause, it reminds me to just plant the seeds. You do not need to be harvesting all the time, and you can't. So I find that really helpful. The third is from my friend Komal, who's also been my coach, when she said, reminded me that recovering from surgery is not a break. These are two very separate things.
I would have thought of it as a break too.
Thank you. I'm glad I'm not alone.
Totally.
But that wisdom reminds me to actually, there is a period for recovery.
Yeah.
And then there's a period for a pause.
Wow.
And so that wisdom also sticks with me when I find myself self-sabotaging and starting to put things on my calendar that don't need to be there in this period that I'm pausing.
Do you have a mechanism for when you say yes versus no?
I have, and I often sometimes break my own rules. So I do have now sort of 3 caveats for what I was saying yes to in this period leading up to surgery, which is I have nothing going on the next day. I stand to learn and get something, not just press or whatnot, but this is a relationship I want to build. And there is value that I'm also going to receive beyond like the tactical out there. Like there's a soulful connection here that I want to explore deeper. That is very much, I have to make that decision. But they bring the ones that they think will work for me.
Yeah.
And honestly, not being my own worst enemy and letting somebody else screen everything first.
That's hard too.
That's really hard, but I have an incredible team who now I'm just like, I need you to tell me if this meets the basic criteria, and if it does,
then
we can have a conversation.
I've never heard anybody state the second one, the soulful one, but I think that's how a lot of us make decisions and we just don't recognize it.
It's something I've been more aware of lately
Yeah.
of why do I say yes to something? And there is always that inexplicable, my soul lit up when I thought about this opportunity that you can't put into paper. And so I've stopped trying to explain it. And I just sort of, it's that soul gut check.
It's like the hell yes. Okay, a book that changed your life, something you think everybody should read.
This is a plug for all romance novels. And I'm going to tell you
Let's
why
go.
Romance novels, I think, will save the world.
That's a really big statement.
My life has gotten infinitely better since I started prioritizing reading romance novels for a few reasons. These are worlds where people who are historically underrepresented or don't have the power, they are loved for all their multitudes, not in spite of some of them. Their pleasure, and they are treated as a priority, so they come first.
Wow.
Literally and figuratively.
Yeah, I was just gonna say.
And there's always a happily ever after. Who doesn't love that?
Yeah.
So in the predictability of romance novels, I have also found incredible diverse stories. Like reading queer romance has really taught me, what does that queer experience look like that isn't my own?
I never thought of that.
And enjoyed these stories. And what does two men falling in love, how similar it is to a man and a woman falling in love, but then also how different it is. Same with two women. Same with someone who might identify as asexual and the limitations that they feel or their non-desires. How does love evolve in that kind of relationship? Non-binary. And I think art has a way of changing hearts and minds in a way reporting and nonfiction content doesn't. So when I find myself holding on to like old ways or old mindsets and questioning why am I so fixed or rigid in something that isn't part of my own experience, I need to learn about this more. I look for a romance novel about that topic because there's the comfort of the romance novel and in these tropes and the happily ever after and the same exact plot. And I also get something much deeper. So
I have never thought of that. And kudos to you for seeking out diverse stories. Okay, we do a pretty smart question.
okay.
So whichever one.
Ooh. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
What is the best advice someone has given you and why? And how about the worst?
Oh, I love this question for you.
This is a really good question for me.
Yeah.
The best advice my mother gave me as a child is she never forced me into a single career. Whenever I said I wanted to be a pop star, a fashion designer, Mr. T from the A-Team, I had a weird phase. It's okay. She would also say, and a doctor. And it was never, you're an Indian kid, you must be a doctor. It was, you can do many things. That and was so important. And I've kind of evolved that ampersand into hyphens that make up my total career. But I do the same with my kid. When Ro especially is like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. I go, great. You can do one thing, you could do many things. I can't wait to see what you'll do. I don't want him to ever feel like he has to be limited into being just one thing.
Does he ever say, I want to make a plan?
Yes. We recently had a really great conversation about rewilding. I read this article and I shared it on 5 Smart Reads about how the best thing we can do for carbon capture, for the earth just retaining enough carbon and putting it back in the soil for basic vegetation and growth, is rewilding or protecting habitats. And so I was like, rewilding is really cool. He goes, Mommy, we should raise money for some rewilding nonprofits. I'm like, okay, how would we make money? He's like, let's make things and sell them. I go, that goes a little bit against the whole process of less stuff allows us to focus on this, but what did you have in mind? So he like wants to open up a merch store. So we went on Canva and he like took some of his like basic designs and we came up with some graphics and I think we'll do like a little bonfire store for it. And I had to talk him down. He wanted night lights and pajamas and all of this. So we had like
big dreamer.
We had a long conversation about margins. But I told him,
he's 9. How old is he?
He's 8.
He's 8.
The worst advice anyone has ever given me was probably to niche down in that I could only create one kind of content. And I was like, I categorically reject that. And I'm glad I did.
What's the smartest decision you've ever made?
Marrying my husband. You know, when we talk about stepping into our power and owning our multitudes, having the right partner really, I think, is the biggest indicator of how your life is going to be.
Everyone says that. That's why I'm so stressed out.
Do you want me to tell you how I manifested my husband?
Sure, tell us.
So back in 2009, I had just turned 25, and my best friend was raving about The Secret, so I read The Secret right after my birthday. And I was like, ooh, manifestation sounds fun. Let's manifest something. And I was still skeptical. So I'm like, I'm going to manifest a husband, literally. So I did what the book told you, which is like write a list or create a vision board of the thing that you think you want. And then I did. So I wrote a list of qualities I thought my husband needed to have. I then went to women in my life who had relationships like the one I wanted for myself.
Yeah.
And I'm an only child, but I'm extremely, extremely close to my cousin and his wife. Like she's effectively my sister-in-law. So one night I was over at her house, we were having a glass of wine, and I showed her this list because their marriage is one I really respect and admire and kind of wanted for myself. She took one look at the list, she ripped it up, and she goes, that's your parents' list. That's not your list.
Good cousin.
I know. And she found like a notepad and a pen from the kitchen, and she made me, like I think went through 8 versions and more line. But by the end,
Do you have this list still?
okay, I'm gonna get to that. So the list on it was someone who's as hungry as I am for what they want out of life, not ambitious. You don't need my manifestation list, you silly watch. Someone who wants to live on the up and settle down in the Upper West Side. This was just like I know this was a random thing, but yes. Someone who makes really nerdy jokes like with me. And I was like specifically like Star Wars, Gattaca, like very nerdy niche sci-fi jokes.
Okay.
I said someone who will be the kind of husband and father that I've seen my father be to my mother. My goals and dreams are just as important to them as their own are.
Yeah.
And there were a couple other things. Oh, I said because I just wanted to make my mom happy, he'll be South Indian and Brahmin and the same sub-Brahmin that she is, my mother is, because that was really important to her. And I was like, when you marry someone, you marry a family, and they marry a family. So I'm like, but we'll get my mother off my back, this particular element. And I was like, that's the one that's least likely to happen.
Funny.
I met my husband 6 weeks later at an Indian networking conference.
Kidding.
He was South India. His family's from South India. They're from Tamil Nadu, Chennai. His family's Iyengar, which is the same sub-Brahmin as my mom's family is.
And is that like, I don't know much about that. Is that hard to find in America?
Well, here's what also worked. I'm not very religious.
Okay.
And my mother's very religious. So I'm like, on paper, he should have this. But in reality, his parents aren't super traditional and always doing prayer ceremonies. They're a little bit more modern and a little bit more relaxed about that part of the culture, which is exactly what it is. Like my father-in-law is like one of my besties. I love him so much. My mother-in-law and I like share book recommendations and like go to yoga together, and she's wonderful. I'm very lucky to have gained amazing parents through marriage who have befriended my parents. Like they all go on trips together too.
That is so special.
And my husband had just started.
Oh my God, you gifted your parents friends.
I did. And like my husband had just started his MBA at Carnegie Mellon right when I met him. So that whatever we built, we really built it together. He was very hungry and ambitious. And we live on the Upper West Side with our 2 sons in like a beautiful home that I feel so lucky and privileged to wake up in every single day. So a couple Thanksgivings ago, we were at my parents' house for the holiday, and I found my copy of The Secret on my shelf, and out fell the list. And it was dated. So I said, honey, like read this list. And he's like, it's me. I go, look at the date. And he's like, that's creepy. He's like, what else can you manifest?
Yeah, seriously. Let's go.
So I actually think this
Sprinkle
list
the fairy dust.
and advice exercise is actually it's a good way of getting clarity on what you think you want, and what people who have been in a long-term relationship that has succeeded through and survived and endured the ups and downs, get the advice from them as well.
That's amazing. I can't wait to see what everybody's going to put on their list. That's fantastic.
So create your manifestation list, and I'm happy to I'll be your Jessica and I'll slash stuff up for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to call you and be like, okay, advice time.
Yes.
I don't need an ear. I need advice.
Yes.
This was awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was so great.